Hello, everybody. This is the Minarchist podcast. Well, my Minarchist podcast. I'm your host, Kalzune. I didn't think I was going to ever make a second episode, but here we are. It is indeed a second episode. I actually did have, a plan for this second episode. I was currently, reading a book, but I wasn't able to finish it within a week. Sorry, I guess I'm slow at reading because I haven't been reading. And I've been, kind of dying in other parts of life, so that kind of got pushed into the background as midterms show up. Anyways, since I still wanted to make one this week, I wanted to try to do it about weekly. I decided this time I'm going to cover something that probably needs to be covered because a lot of people say there isn't a good enough video on it. Well, this is technically a podcast on it, which is esoteric, I guess, but same difference. There's no one out there that has really done a great job in verbalizing the various types of laws and legislations. Or at least I don't think so. Natural law, common law, what's the difference? What is rule of law? How should legislation be done, if at all, etc., etc., etc. And as such, I've taken it on myself to try and go through it in at least a condensed way, or a way that I see it, and maybe drop a few tidbits here and there about how other ideologies might see it, because you might as well, because the more comprehensive it is, the easier it is to figure out what each side stands for, what their values are, and have more meaningful discussions and better ways of talking for or against a specific side. And as such, however, this will be with a libertarian spin, of course. I'm a Minarchist. This is the Minarchist podcast. Whoa. I know, surprising. Anyways, let's just get right into it, I guess. I have this little note card written with the general structure that I want to follow compared to the completely unstructured first one. And to start off, what better place to start off than, natural law? Because that is the law. And the way this natural law works is very much based off of your principles or ideals, your ideology. This is the laws. These are the if there were laws that were supposedly immortal, this would probably be the closest you would get to those said laws. How are you find them, be it the state of nature, or some other excuse you might use for your laws. If it's not based off of libertarian ethics, it might be based off of consequentialism or utilitarianism, or there could be none, and you're just an actual anti-ethical barbarian that thinks might makes right is correct. Whichever one it is, your principles, your laws, the things that should always exist to some level. And since, libertarian, minarchist, Locke's state of nature is probably the place to start. Because, it's kind of impressive how much John Locke did, despite living in the 17th century. Genuinely impressive. But yeah, to go through the state of nature again, which I think I've done last episode, is you take a person and you put them in this scenario, this it's basically a deserted island, but you're not pulling a paradox or a fallacy off of it. So you grab a person and you place them in this state of nature. There's no other people and nothing else to mess with this person, no person this other person can mess with. It's just a singular person existing in this area all alone, and you just figure out what rights or abilities do they have in that state of nature. And those are the rights that should also exist outside of the state of nature as much as humanly possible without interfering on another person's rights. But not even getting into that. It's just like, what can people do if there is no state? Like, what is their innate ability? And as such, by looking at this person in the state of nature again, we find 3 answers. It's life, because, they can live. Liberty, because, they can move around and do things on their own. And property, they can claim things. There's not really a point to claiming anything if there's no one else, but maybe it makes things more convenient. So, yeah. Life, liberty, property, the big 3. It's very important to like libertarianism and all that. So without those 3, you're kind of not a libertarian if you don't uphold those 3 at least to some extent. So yeah. But the case gets more complicated when, for some reason, a second person exists in the state of nature, which can happen, by the way. Apparently, more than 2 people could exist at any given time, or more than 1 person. So now you have these 2 people, which individually, like separately, they both have their like rights of those 3 rights, life, liberty, property, in their own little like bubble. But now they both exist in the same bubble. So what does this entail for their rights? For this, I'm going to use J.S. Mill. I'm going to call it the harm principle. I don't remember what he called it. But the general idea of this is that, like, your rights end as soon as it would violate someone else's rights. So that means your right to throw punches ends when it's going to hit someone's face. I think that's pretty clear. Or your right to claim property ends when it's someone else's property, etc., etc. Of course, there might be some issues in a state of, like, it's life or death for either party. This happens in nature a lot with, like, the predator-prey relationship where, like, one has to die so the other must survive. But nature, as it stands, this is going a little off topic, but that's fine. The thing with nature is that, in a sense, it's kind of amoral because you're just trying to survive. You can't really follow or have morals to a high extent if following those morals will lead to your death. So this is actually like one of the things that allows us to be more moral than a lot of other creatures, is this very fact that's like, since we've overcome the overcame nature to an extent to where we could have morals. Like, I'm just going to use this as an example, but now that we have like such an excess of food and food of like different types, people can start considering the moral questions of like, is it really ethical to eat animals, etc., etc. Because there is a moral question to that. I don't really want to get into it here. Maybe I can. But I'm going to save that probably near the end for more contentious issues than that. Because, I'm just trying to lay down the framework of, like, what this is and not, like, specific cases. But I might get into specific cases at the end just to give some insight about the way I think and function. But yes, the harm principle, where it's like, your rights ends when someone else begins. And these natural laws are great because they're completely universal and impartial. This is like great because it follows the rule of law, which I'll mention a few times, but I won't get into the definition of what rule of law is until near the end, I think. So just keep that as a note. So yeah, and if this is like the most like idealized form of law to exist, once you have these like natural laws, ooh, it smells like air freshener in here. It kind of hurts my throat. Once you have these ideal laws, if you're gonna have like a state that protects these laws for like these specific rights, is these negative rights that are like important to like the human condition, they should be constitutionalized, because these are like rights that should never be gone over or gone above. That's why the Constitution was like such an important thing to create in the US, because it and enshrined those rights of like life, liberty, and property. Well, pursuit of happiness, but I'm gonna make a wild guess and say the pursuit of happiness was based off of property to some extent. I know it's kind of a materialist way to look at it, so much for spiritual happiness, but I think that's also covered in like First Amendment, but feels like I swallowed a lifetime of dust in 5 minutes. But yeah, moving along, after we have these like obvious cases, we then have like more complicated cases of like where these two people end up in a conflict, but it's not really an obvious violation of natural law. I'd have to think of an example, but like, I guess it all like eventually goes back to natural law, but like some situations that haven't been like completely defined yet under natural law, like for example, someone was to let someone else borrow something but they don't return it, I guess. I mean, and then that leads to an issue of like what's the word, so like they're allowed to have it, but only for like a limited amount of time, and now that they haven't returned it, it's technically a property violation, but you did give it to them in the first place. And then that could lead to some really weird arguing, but like there's clearly one correct view of that. But I think this is more for like fringe cases than something that natural law cannot handle. Most things can be derived from natural law, but for like the things that can't, that's kind of where like common law comes in. And common law is kind of not possible if there's only two people, as either they come to an agreement or they don't. In order to have common law, you need a third person to enter the bubble, and now with these three people, you basically have like, assuming they're all impartial to each other, you basically have like, in any case of conflict between two people, the third one could be the arbiter. And then, they go through their things, they each say their cases, and then the arbiter like decides on that case based on like rational reasoning and common law and, well, precedent from previous cases, but we're not quite there yet. And then based on that, they come to a resolution, after, if both parties agree to like go through the arbiter for a resolution, they do the resolution, and then that becomes your like common law. It becomes precedent for similar cases in the future. And the reason why you would want this like common law to be impartial when you're the arbiter is because you could end up in that same conflict, and if you don't give it an impartial one, you could be the one that could like suffer the consequences of your ruling. So it gives an incentive to not create partial laws, because once you create partial laws, that basically opens the gates to like discrimination and keeping people down based on arbitrary metrics. So you really have to be careful that like all the laws that you make are very like impartial, universal. It's like a continuation of natural law, where natural law cannot really exist. And as such, it fits well into the rule of law yet again. Yes, rule of law. Moving forward, I guess the third part is, since you technically have a state, is like if there should be any legislation at all. And that is a good question to ask, because compared to like natural law and common law, where it's like natural law is just from like this like philosophical idealized version of law and what it should be, so it's completely free from like, or tries to be as free as possible from human distortion. In common law, based on like a practical application of natural law in conflicts, so it's still very idealized and impartial due to like consider specific social mechanisms to it. Legislation gets a little more complicated, as if you give like these people the power to create laws for whatever reason, you give them the power to create laws, you have to be careful about how much power in law creating they actually have and how it works. Because like, this is going to move more to democracy, I think. But like, democracy, as I would see it currently, is more of a like tool to reach an ideal. Because like, democracy in itself is not an ideal, in my opinion. It's a useful tool for like, say for example, there's like a few limited outcomes possible, so not so much as the infinite variability and choice of the free market. So like, there's only a few limited outcomes that kind of everyone needs to like generally agree upon, some majoritarian agreement upon some like huge issue that only has a few answers. In that case, democracy is pretty good because it actually gives you the majoritarian view on the issue and what should be done on it, because it will affect everyone in that issue. I think, for example, well, this is a very contentious example and shouldn't even have been fucking decided like that, but we're gonna ignore that and just use it as an example anyways. But like, the issue of abortion, technically, because there's only like a few options you have with it, like pro-life, pro-choice, evictionism, departurism, something like that. Like, you only have like a few options you could really have, and as such, the people kind of have to like agree in some majoritarian way on how it should be done. But technically, this is not to like downplay the abortion debate or issue or anything like that. That is a complicated issue, to say the least, and definitely one that really depends. So I don't really know if a legislation could ever really solve that, or if it'll just make people upset. I don't know. Abortion debates can get really fucking weird, man. Okay, there was one some days ago or a week ago with this like pro-life no matter what person. It was kind of fucking insane, to be honest. And the reason why it was like so off the balls insane is that they themselves were the reductio ad absurdum. So like, I wanted to see how far they would go with it, and they literally went as far as humanly possible with it on their own volition. Because I like reductio ad absurdum a lot. It's a great, it's a great tool. I like using it a lot. But it's just like, because, it was first starting off with like, okay, it starts at conception. That's a very common view. Whether or not that's actually true, or if it has a consciousness at that point, etc., that could be debated. I'm not here to really give a stance on that. At least not now. I'm just here to tell the story. And then we moved back to saying that like the egg cells were also alive, and the sperm cells as well. So like, killing those would also be wrong because you're killing life. And then we moved back into saying, okay, killing your skin cells is wrong because they're technically all conscious and they have life, which is like, now we're getting insane. And then we pulled the full like absurdity of like, because after that I was asking like, okay, does that mean that killing cancer cells would be wrong, even if it meant you would die. And then he was like, yes. And I was like, oh my god. Saying that killing cancer cells is wrong is actually completely insane, but it really shows like what kind of some logical conclusions you might have to take depending on your stance. So yeah, getting chemotherapy makes you a mass murderer, genocidal maniac, I guess, even if the other option is completely dying. Oh my god. Like, I wasn't insane for thinking about that. That person completely discredited themselves just by going down the rabbit hole that far. Because as soon as you say that, like, people who have cancer deserve to die, which is, like, the practical result of that, you kind of lose your entire argument. Oh, gosh, I love the modern day. It's great. Sometimes you find the most interesting of ideas. And that is definitely one of those interesting ideas. It almost feels like a shit post if he wasn't being completely serious. But yeah, legislation, where was I? Right, this is where it gets difficult, but like, I think to some extent legislation has a place, assuming it's trying to be based off of natural or common law, or at the very least, whatever legislation it makes falls below said natural or common law. Because like, there is some legislation that can be like genuinely useful to like well-functioning of society. Like, for example, some driving laws. I mean, the reason why like traffic laws are like a good thing is because they're universal, they're impartial, so they meet like how natural law works. And also, they allow us to predict the actions of people in advance. These would be called like, formal laws, I guess, if I was to use the words of Hayek. So this idea of just like, these laws, in his view, well, this is getting a little bit into the book I was going to try to review next week, but like, it fits very well within this category of like, these laws are good because they're impartial. You know, that's what the criteria is, that they have to be impartial. They are universal. So, you know, that's good. It's impartial, universal, and people can plan around them because you already know them in advance. And as such, you end up with like, and that's his like justification for some amount of government based on the idea of this rule of law. And now that we're here, I can talk about rule of law. Because the way he put it for the rule of law, this is definitely going to be repeated again. Let me find it. Because I did write it somewhere. Because it was kind of important. Gosh, I wrote over a page of fucking bullet notes on the rule of law. But yeah, the purpose, the main primary reason for the rule of law is that, like, it restricts the authority so you know how and when they use their power, so you can plan for it in the future or around it. And, you know, it limits digression or discretion from the executive on what kind of power it's going to use beforehand, so it's very important. And this is not to be confused with like what I'm going to call substantive laws, you know, your equity laws, your socialist laws, whatever you want to call them, your economic planning laws. Because like with these laws, in order to make people equal, even though they're inherently unequal in nature, that's another part. People are naturally unequal. It's not even that hard to prove. For example, two people being born on different years are going to have different ages, so they're not equal. That's just straight up a fact. So in order to like make these people like equal in outcome, you have to discriminate. And that's like the biggest issue with like when you start abandoning the rule of law as it stands, is that like you have to have a state that discriminates people. In order to give out welfare, you have to give more to the less, or more to the people who have less, regardless of why they have less, and take from the more, or people who have more, regardless of why they have more, in a sense of discrimination. And because of this, it's almost like impossible to plan in the future around that, because you don't really know if or when it's going to be taken or given to you. Not completely. I mean, you can try to build around it, but then you have people trying to plan around either trying to gain more wealth from others or not losing their wealth, and that probably creates evil people and evil systems. I don't think that would be a good system to set up, to be completely honest. But yeah, the point of the rule of law is to provide like some level of like important knowledge or foresight in things. For example, like if there's like some kind of law that says you need to have nutritional labels on your products and be accurate, that would technically be like an impartial universal thing, because if you sell something that has nutrition or is eaten, you have to put a label on it. So it's impartial, it's universal, because all edible things have to do that. And it also gives important knowledge to the consumer of what the hell are they eating. So yeah. Anything else? This is definitely jumping in. This is like chapter 6 from The Road to Serfdom. I'm trying to paraphrase here. I'll save that for the actual book review. So yeah, that's the general view on like the rule of law if taken correctly. Not to be confused with like some kind of rule of duty where it's like you're trying to get some outcome based off of law. Because the thing with the rule of law, or just the democratic process in general, is that in order to actually pull it off, it has to be a bit impartial and majoritarian in nature. And some things, like I would say the economy, for example, cannot be decided by a said majoritarian. Like, there is no singular economic plan that works for a majority, so it can't really be turned into something in lawcraft. And as such, try to think. Usually I write more than speak, so when I'm speaking, I don't fully know where I'm going. Because with like writing, if I stop somewhere, I can just look at it. Oh, there's the answer, and then write it. But while speaking, there are no words to look back at. It's just a bunch of bars from my audio recording software. A little bit difficult, but not an insurmountable challenge. Try to think. Is there anything else I'm really missing from this? Not really, no. Because I covered natural law and common law, and I did cover legislation a little bit. I think for just like a baseline podcast or video on this idea, this is probably good enough. Yeah, I can't really think of a reason why it would be anything else, to be honest. I mean, I could get into some views I have of it, I guess, but like, there's not really a reason to. That's kind of the issue. I don't see a reason to, at least. Because that wasn't really the point. The point was to more go over this. But I guess the point is that, like, when designing a law system, you should try to, like, avoid discrimination, which is, like, it's kind of ironic that, like, the people making the most discriminatory laws are, like, the modern day progressives. because in order to do said equity or reparations or whatever other buzzwords they use that have no coherent or fixed definition, despite what they might want you to think. Because the thing about like this whole like economic planning or socialism or progressivism or anything is that they want to think of it as a science, even though there technically really isn't any science behind it, because it's in the academics. This is thanks to a whole bunch of reasons I don't want to get into in this. I'll probably get into it a lot more and when I actually finish the fucking book and did a review of it. But it's just like they think it's like a science or something and all of that, or that this is the future or inevitable depending on who it is or what it is, because it is like the academic norm. Why is the academic norm? I don't want to get into the cathedral. There are other people who can get into that, but it's just like, because what they've done is that they've taken the term like equality and they've perversed it in a way that I couldn't even have done, even if I wanted to. It's kind of insane. At some point, I wonder if the Dixiecrats are still alive. They probably are. I mean, it would make sense to some extent. But for real, when it comes to like these moving back into like legislation and the rule of law, when it comes to these like laws, when you do like equity stuff, you have to discriminate with the state because, you know, you have to treat people differently in order to give them different outcomes through the state. I think that's pretty obvious. There's no way to really say otherwise, because that would be saying that no one should get equity because they would be treated differently based on something. So in a sense, it causes discrimination. This is why there's like so many issues with like them. And also, like, when you make laws, they're very hard to remove, so you really have to be careful and try to avoid creating these discriminatory laws in the first place. Like, the perfect example, to be honest, is like any form of race-based equity. Like, affirmative action is the one to go to. I think it was struck down. I'm not going to search it up right now, but affirmative action was a double whammy because, you know, first of all, it was discriminatory, and second of all, it inadvertently harmed the minority group, the Asians, because the thing about it is, like, when you just like turn an entire race into a block, you have to be racist. That's kind of the entire point, and I don't think it's right. And this is like especially like unfortunate and true for like a lot of the like Asian ethnicities in the US, because like compared to the other minority groups, or well, as perceived minority groups, they overperform. Like they do even better than like white people in these statistics, which I don't know why we even care about these statistics in the first place, to be honest, because in a way you're kind of just being like the like past racist in the modern day, using your statistical or academic facts to try to paint a minority group of being a specific way, and I think that's fucking immoral and completely wrong. But it's like, but since they're overperforming, these like equity bills or whatever just disadvantages them. We saw that with like Harvard and all that, and that's where I'm pretty sure that affirmative action got struck down. Hell, it should have been struck down like 30 years ago, but it's very hard to get rid of a law once it comes into existence. That's kind of the point. And this kind of just like shows what happens when you when you base your ideals off of some like lofty egalitarian ideal of like equity over something that actually treats people fairly, even if the outcomes are not equal, because the outcomes were never going to be equal with different people. I think that's kind of just a point we have to like realize and accept to some extent, is that like when you create equity laws, you have to discriminate. That's like the point I really want to drill in, and why I am like basically completely against them if done in that way. Of course, does that mean all welfare is bad? Probably not. I mean, I would prefer for it to be like voluntary if possible. But if it is not possible to do it in that way, because, you know, we still want to build a functional society that tries to lift everyone up, that is like a good deal. That is a good thing to go for, as long as it doesn't like put other people below unfairly. Is that like, if we have these like, if we're gonna have some form of equity, first of all, we should try to limit the way that the state is like partial towards people. Like, using race as a metric is such a bad metric, because that literally perpetuates racism, because it's like you're turning people into like a class based on race, assuming that they're all like this single uniform unit that can't act differently despite their individual efforts and will. And that's so unbelievably discriminatory that it kind of sickens me. But also, with this idea of welfare, we should try to do it in a way that keeps the general like competition, that works on like still like market competition principles. So like, you know, where we try to keep market competition, but we try to use it in a way that allows welfare to work. Like, I think the best one I've read so far would be from Milton Friedman's Free to Choose, where he was basically advocating for some kind of negative income tax. Because what this does is instead of like building these public services, which never really works that well, if you've seen the NHS in the UK, you would know it doesn't work. Oh my god, that thing is such a mess. All these like public systems, they're actually, it feels disgraceful to call them public, because in reality they're just state-ran monopolies. But yeah, you know, like public schooling, public health, etc., etc. We're seeing it in these welfare states where it's just not really working. If anything, it's making things worse. I've always wanted to wait 8 months for a hospital bed, or, you know, have the amount of hospital beds decrease despite funding going up. So yeah, this idea of like a negative income tax. So instead of like having this like inefficient bureaucratic system where the government runs these programs that never work, what we do instead is that we keep those systems private, but the people who are making whatever amount of money is needed, instead of them just getting like government programs, what they get is like a negative income tax. And so that way they get their like negative income tax, and then they're free to choose from like the various business and competition for like which services they want. And I think that would work much better. And it also allows them to like actually choose which needs they value more or less or wants. Because, you know, not everyone values food the same as housing, the same as healthcare, the same as education. And so by giving them the flexibility of this negative income tax, people are actually like free to choose what they want, instead of just being like technically just like a form of like serf or prisoner of the state, where the state decides what you want and what levels, and you have no say in the decision. So in a sense, it's kind of also giving like more freedom and choice to the people of lower income brackets to actually choose what they want in terms of it. Because yes, they're still technically getting welfare under this system, but it's a welfare that allows them to be free to choose how to implement it for their own life, compared to just being forced with it. And I think that's a system that would work way better. But in order to implement that, you would have to cut out the other forms of welfare, because if you just add it on top of that, you just create more bloat. Because at that point, it's just like a UBI plus all of these like natural rights. And also the other thing about the negative income tax is that it doesn't harm people for accidentally making too much money. Because the problem with like welfare in the United States, how it works is like once you pass an income bracket, you lose all your welfare. So ironically, you somehow end up in a worse position if you make more money than if you were to just stay poor and keep the welfare. So by artificially chaining people down like that, you create some like serious issues. With the negative tax, it could be a bit more like regressive to like when you make more money, the negative income tax like goes down, but it's still like you're still gaining overall as it does it. Plus, you still have your same services because you were free to choose them in the first place. It kind of shows like kind of the beauty and just natural function of having a free market system, and instead like building things around competition, or to like facilitate competition instead of building things against competition. Because like I see that as a very good system if implemented correctly, but it has to be done by removing the current welfare system first and foremost. They cannot coexist. It would be an absolute nightmare, to be honest. Also, I guess this technically fits into law or legislation, because instead of like doing a form of like substantive law where like you're like super discriminating, we're trying to like shift it more towards a formal law where it's like we already know the outcomes already of like, instead of basing it off of race or gender or sex or whatever else, we're instead basing it off of incomes. And then based off of these incomes, based off of these incomes, there's like some level of negative income tax you get so you can still meet your, needs to live. Technically, they're not rights. I think I made that clear in the first podcast. And also, the way we fund these taxes also matters. Again, I'm just going to refer back to the first podcast for that yet again. The way I said it was like basically a form of like taxing those retributions from rights violations and some form of land value tax. And if that's able to generate like accidentally create excessive wealth beyond what's needed to keep the state functioning, that could become welfare. But like, that's not the initial plan. The initial plan was for other reasons. But yeah, I think that covers it all pretty well, along with like a small little side tangent into like negative income tax and other types of lawcraft. I didn't want to touch the hot topic button issues because they could get very, very like controversial, and I don't want to cause mass controversy. So yeah, I think this is where I should end this podcast. It was kind of neat talking about all of this stuff. And hopefully next week I actually do finish the book if I have the time for it. Otherwise I'll have to come up with a new random topic to talk about. And yeah, I'll see you all later.